Okay, so I will proceed by inviting the rest of our colleagues to the stage as well to proceed into the MEDEMER presentations. Can you please join us? So we have Ababa Bayo, Investment Commissioner, who's going to be presenting on the basics of MEDEMER. We also have Dr. Namerra Mammo, who's an economic expert at the Office of the Prime Minister, who's going to be presenting on MEDEMER and economics. And we have Dr. Gedeon Timotheos, who's the Deputy Attorney General, who's going to be presenting on MEDEMER and politics. Okay, so the short briefing is really to acquaint you with the concept of MEDEMER, which is an Amharic word really loosely translating into synergy. And as had been indicated at the beginning by State Minister Marcos Rique, the concept is based on the Prime Minister's book that was launched a few weeks ago. And MEDEMER is the basis for the administration's continuing reforms as well. So this is why we thought it's important to engage you in dialogue and an understanding of what's going to be the underpinning or the foundation of the continuing reforms as well. So the presentations on MEDEMER will focus on MEDEMER as a way of life, in addition to Ethiopia's political, economic, and foreign relations roadmap. So I will begin by inviting Ababa Bayo, who's going to be giving us it will be about 20 minutes each for each of the presentations before we go for coffee break, and then we'll come back to a Q&A on it. But Ababa Bayo is going to be presenting on the basics of MEDEMER.
My name is Ababa. I know many of you in my capacity as a Commissioner of the Ethiopian Investment Commission, and I would like to use this opportunity actually to extend my heartfelt gratitude for all the support that you provide us and for the excellent partnership that we forge with you all in our effort to attract foreign direct investment into Ethiopia. But today, I'm not going to pledge your support in attracting investment. I will be addressing you on the MEDEMER conception. I'll lay the fundamentals, what MEDEMER is, and the essential conditions that are outlined under it. It's actually the first time that this presentation is being delivered in the English language, and I hope we have done justice to the book of His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy while translating it, and you can imagine the risk of not doing so. So we'll do our level best to present it in the space of 20 minutes that have been allocated to us. Normally this would take an hour and 30 minutes. So the presentation outline includes number one, point of departure. Why do we need actually MEDEMER as a conception to govern government policies? As was earlier indicated, MEDEMER is not just a philosophical thought. It's actually going to be the governing philosophy that will define the economic approach, the political approach, as well as our foreign relations is going to be defined by the MEDEMER conception. So its significance cannot be overstated. So I'll explain why we need MEDEMER in the first place. And then, of course, just like any political ideology, like any political philosophy, we will need to understand the linkage between MEDEMER and human nature. What is it in the human nature that signifies the importance of MEDEMER? So in that, we will look into the needs of human beings. We will look into the characteristics of human beings. We will also look into the human potentials, which will define the contents of MEDEMER. And of course, the big elephant in the room, what's MEDEMER? As was indicated, synergy, or does it actually go beyond and above synergy? So we'll discuss the meaning of MEDEMER in this setting. And then the premises of MEDEMER. For MEDEMER, what are the underlying premises of MEDEMER? What motivated the government into calling for MEDEMER? I think that's where we'll be discussing the premise of MEDEMER. And then we have 6 pillars of MEDEMER, which we call the 6 S's of MEDEMER. We will discuss each one by one. And then we'll also address the fundamentals of MEDEMER, or the essential conditions that will determine the success or otherwise of MEDEMER. And finally, we will look into the goals of MEDEMER. Eventually, what do you actually seek to achieve through this philosophical conception called MEDEMER? What are the objectives of MEDEMER? This will be discussed in my last slide. So the point of departure is this. If you look at the history of Ethiopia and probably the history of many of our African countries, it's the case that we get to import ideologies and philosophies and economic thoughts from elsewhere and struggle to adapt it to the conditions in the country. That's been the case in Ethiopia for so long, for instance. Whether we, our attempt to adopt capitalism or socialism or mixed economy, or the last 27 years revolutionary democracy, the effort that we have been trying to do was to implant a system that originated in a completely different context that doesn't even look into the prevailing realities in Ethiopia, and that has resulted into so many misgivings, so many failures, so many injustices in the society. That's why His Excellency the Prime Minister, when he came up with the idea of MEDEMER, he sought to actually strike a balance between the need to adopt foreign values, foreign concepts, to that of reflecting the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. So this is, a call for a solution based on prevailing national circumstances, and it also seeks to take into account the nature of human beings. I think here it may be worthwhile to quote one of the most consequential leaders of the 20th century, Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is quoted to have said, "Leaders must cross the river by feeling for the stones." That's the kind of pragmatism MEDEMER brings into the table. We have to keep our feet on the ground. We have to feel for the thorn. We have to feel for the slippery slopes. We have to feel for the stones. We have to always be mindful of the practical reality under our feet. So whenever we try to adapt a solution, it should be with the conception that that solution takes into account the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. It shouldn't be just, a prescription of a foreign solution based on an abstract ism. It should reflect the prevailing situation in Ethiopia. That's why MEDEMER tries to understand the prevailing situation in Ethiopia. It also finds solutions from the knowledge base, from the wisdom that the society has accumulated over the years, but it doesn't completely ignore ideas, thoughts, experiences that may have worked in other countries. To the extent that there is a need to adopt practices, policies that have been effectively implemented in other countries, it does so, but having regard to the prevailing reality in Ethiopia. So the first thing that MEDEMER does is it tries to look into human nature. So the whole idea of politics is to provide solution for human needs. And it tries to define what these needs are. It also looks into human characteristics. I think human characteristics have been defined by so many philosophers, and MEDEMER also tries to look into these human characteristics as it outlines solutions for the Ethiopian situation. And of course, human potential should also be viewed in the context of MEDEMER for all the policies that it prescribes. So in terms of human needs, it broadly categorizes human needs into two: direct and indirect needs. When it talks about direct need, it refers to the need for sustenance and self-preservation. Every human being, almost out of an innate nature, wants to protect himself or herself from any danger. That's, I think, the first need that's clearly outlined as part of the human needs. And of course, there is also the indirect need, which includes basic human needs, the shelter, water, and all other basic human needs. And then human beings do not just live for water, food. You may be able to actually meet this basic human need, but if you deny them the freedom, if you deny them the liberty, there is a chance that you're going to create problems. So for so long, there has been a tendency to actually overlook this aspect of human needs and unduly emphasize the need for addressing basic human needs. If you look at the Ethiopia's experience over the last 27 years, we were so proud of implementing an economic, achieving an economic growth that by any standard can be considered remarkable. It's, I think, a good thing that we've been able to achieve on average double-digit growth for the last decade and a half. But again, this overlooked the need for its citizens to have freedom, to exercise full freedom, to exercise their liberty. And it doesn't matter how much you have actually been able to fulfill the basic human needs, sooner or later, there is going to be a demand for respect for freedom, respect for liberty. So these indirect human needs are all taken into account as MEDEMER seeks to provide solution for all the ills that affect us, for all the ills that affect our society. So from the perspective of MEDEMER, these human needs, whether we call them direct or indirect needs, are considered to be intertwined. And when you actually seek to address one human need, you may be able to compromise on other needs. So there is a need to strike a balance in your effort to addressing these needs. Each need requires an equal amount of attention by the government. But as you strive to addressing these needs, there is always a likelihood of one need running into a negation of the other. So there is an attempt to strike a balance. You will see it later on that one of the fundamental features of MEDEMER is there is a need to creating a balancing solution for every problem that's affecting the country. It seeks to create an equilibrium situation, whether it's in understanding human needs or any other solution that it seeks to provide. The fundamental foundation lies on creating that equilibrium, that balancing act that's needed. So it calls that our fates are intertwined, and the preferred pathway to fulfill our needs is MEDEMER. And then, of course, human characteristics is also taken into account. You know, some people think, you know, human beings are irrational, they are selfish, they are greedy. You know, we have also philosophers that made that kind of assessment. If you look at, you know, the assessment by, for instance, Thomas Hobbes, he categorizes human beings as selfish, irrational. On the contrary, if you look at, you know, the philosophical thought by Plato, he calls human beings, you know, inherently rational. Now, we cannot categorically put every human being in one basket. As we try to seek a solution that perfectly adapts to the situation in Ethiopia, we need to understand that this is a world where bad and good people live. This is a world where both Hitler and Mahatma Gandhi lived on. So let's not just categorically put everyone in one basket as we try to come up with a solution for whatever problem that we have as a nation. In fact, what it calls for is, as part of this MEDEMER exercise, we should nurture traits, behaviors that are considered to be good and create a society that can live in a harmonious relationship. That's what MEDEMER seeks to achieve. And then, of course, human potential is also part of the equation, as MEDEMER outlines a solution both for political problems, also for the economic problems and other problems that the country has. So the human potential, humans have the free will to determine their future. They have the capacity to change their course. They have the capacity and ability to determine their future. That's the underpinning of MEDEMER. We are not inclined into believing that, you know, humans are governed by the action and reaction of physics. Human beings have the full potential, whose full potential can actually be also harnessed towards the end goal of bringing good results in a country. That's what MEDEMER outlines. Now, having said this, what is MEDEMER? I'll try to briefly summarize the meaning of MEDEMER as clearly captured in the book by the Prime Minister. So MEDEMER has, you know, three components or three features. The first aspect is what we call bringing together good ideas, good people, good finance, whatever is present today, which is so essential for the betterment of this nation, will have to be collected, brought together, and used for good end. That's what bring together means. In Amharic, we call this mesebseb. And it looks into the present day Ethiopia, where we should be able to bring together ideas, resources, knowledge, capabilities of actors. Whether it's a former opposition turned out to be an ally like Obolenjo, or anyone who has who is ready to shake hands, the government should work closely with everyone that has good ideas, that has resources, that has the finance. That's what the first aspect of MEDEMER is. Let's not reject people on account of factors that are not really important. Let's actually bring together ideas, let's bring together resources, let's bring knowledge, let's effectively utilize the capabilities of various actors. That's the first aspect of MEDEMER. The second aspect is what we define it to be accretion. In Amharic, this is referred to as makamachet, and it pertains more to the past. Whatever we have done in the past has to be built upon. We should not be in the business of starting from scratch. If you look at the history of Ethiopia, there is a tendency for every leader, forget every leader, even every minister that comes after another, tends to ignore everything that has been done by the predecessor and starts from the scratch. And look what we have as a nation. So instead of actually starting from scratch, instead of demolishing what has been done in the past, let's build on the good things. Let's build on the successes that have been achieved. And that's what accretion is about. Let's strive for accretion based on previous achievements and by rectifying mistakes. Now, in the Ethiopian context, one, for instance, can refer to this exercise to implement federalism in Ethiopia, which is an excellent political virtue one can call. Within the Ethiopian reality, federalism, at least to the present day Ethiopia, is the only solution that one should advocate for. And despite all what the naysayers say, the Prime Minister is a full champion of federalism. In fact, you can't find any better federalist than him. His only sin is he's calling to perfect this federalism that has been implemented in the past, to fill the gaps, to fill the mistakes that have been implemented over the past decade, and in fact, 3 decades one can call. So federalism, the successive economic growth that this government has achieved should also be built upon, and whatever mistakes that may have been done in the past have to be corrected. That's what accretion is about. So this vertical summation, vertical togetherness, builds on past achievements, ideas, by coalescing them with new ones. So the whole point being, it's about building capital. Let's bring together ideas, resources. Let's do accretion, and then eventually it will result into accumulation. Now, accumulation is often used within the context of capital, but in this particular case, whether it's political reform or judicial reform or whatever form of reform we are talking about, can actually be explained in terms of accumulation. Let's build on whatever past achievements that have been done in this exercise to build a nation, in this exercise to come up with also a legitimate government. So in a country where you have a low foundational capacity, which would mean you have been actually starting from scratch every time you get things wrong, then you have a very low foundational capacity, and your effort to achieve prosperity will become extremely difficult. So that's why you should always build on the past successes to ensuring that that elusive prosperity will one day become a reality. So this low foundational capacity can be made high foundational capacity if you have actually been accumulating on all past successes, on all good ideas, virtues, resources that you've had in the past. So capital built over time, transformation would be much easier, and prosperity would be within the grasp of this country. So what are the fundamental objectives of MEDEMER? Okay, MEDEMER means bringing together ideas, resources, people. It's about accretion, it's about accumulation, but what objective does it actually seek to achieve to this particular country? There are 3 fundamental objectives that MEDEMER seeks to achieve. Number 1, it's about maintaining and building positive political and economic achievements. So past achievements, whether it's economical, historical, political, will be built upon. We're not going to start from scratch. We're not going to undo everything that has been done. We would rather perfect the imperfect, and we'll build on it. That's the first objective of MEDEMER. The second is as a nation, there have been a number of mistakes that have been done, historical mistakes that have costed us a lot as a nation. Those mistakes have to be acknowledged. Those mistakes have to be corrected, rectified. That's, again, one other objective of MEDEMER. And of course, the third objective is we need to fulfill interests and aspirations of future generation. This is not just about today. We should look into the future, and the future of the next generation should have a very good foundation. And that's one other objective of MEDEMER. And eventually, of course, we will have a democratically prosperous nation, and that's the objective of MEDEMER. So what are, the premises of MEDEMER? Why does MEDEMER signify there is actually a need for it? Number one, I think there is what's called social isolation, or you might call it alienation. Now, any individual would feel alone, would feel empty to lead life just as one individual. It's the same with countries. You negotiate treaties, bilateral, regional, or multilateral treaties, so that actually you can bring ideas, resources, experts together to find a lasting solution for whatever problem you might have encountered as countries. Similarly, with MEDEMER, it believes that there is social isolation. There is a need to come into togetherness. There is a need for accretion. There is a need for accumulation, and that is a result of this social isolation that would otherwise come if people were left alone to their own mercy. And of course, it also acknowledges that events are intertwined, not isolated. If you look at, for instance, the event that was briefly explained earlier by my colleagues Bilene and Obolenjo, people would say this is a result of the economic malaise that this country has had over the last few years. Or people may say, oh, it's because we have not been able to create enough number of jobs for the youth that they are actually busy throwing stones at each other. Yes, that's part of the explanation. But part of the explanation could as well be that the way we have been implementing or realizing human rights in Ethiopia, people have not really enjoyed their freedom for so long that the moment they just feel left for their, the moment they feel like they have actually that right, they tend to they tend to misunderstand the extent to which they can enjoy these rights. I think that's a politically correct way of putting it. The point being, you cannot understand situations in isolation. Events are intertwined, and it's not isolated. And of course, MEDEMER is harmony created through common shared understanding. It doesn't try to bring oneness in this nation. It actually celebrates diversity. So the whole point is, because there is this social isolation, human beings are always in a sphere of either competition or cooperation. And what MEDEMER seeks to achieve is we need to actually balance our level of competition and our level of cooperation as we try to address any problems that we may have as a country. If it is just unbridled competition, you will end up having loss instead of filling gaps. It will result in greediness, despair, self-isolation, destruction, and it would be a complete resistance to any change that we are seeking to achieve through this MEDEMER. And of course, competition is also good. As economists often say, competition spurs efficiency. So inadequate competition is not also a good thing. So we should always strike that balance, because inadequate competition means quick satisfaction. We would be resistant to change, and it also would result in social isolation, hence failure. And then this competition versus cooperation. If we have a boundless cooperation, then that would also mean effortless success, sense of entitlement, dependency, not valuing perseverance. This would be a result of boundless cooperation. If you just give everything for your friend or your brother or your sister or your son or daughter, that will only create a sense of dependency in them. So this boundless cooperation, whether it's applied to human beings or for that matter, even among states, will result eventually in failure. And then inadequate cooperation is also not a good thing. So finally, what we're trying to seek and to achieve is we need to balance the competition and cooperation that we're trying to implement in a country. This can apply for the political competition that this country may have among the different opposition parties in Ethiopia, or as we call them, competing political parties. So let me just briefly go through the 6 S's of MEDEMER. I'm told I think I only have 5 minutes. So the 6 pillars of MEDEMER include these 6 S's. Number 1 is synoptic. Number 2, synchronization, synthesis, symmetry, symbiosis, and system. I'll discuss each one by one. Synoptic, when we talk about synoptic, I think I mentioned earlier that we don't need to see things in isolation. I think we need to have a very comprehensive look at to issues. So we need to strive for additional outcomes by looking at the relations and the interactions of issues instead of viewing each individually. If you look at these individuals whose eyes are folded, and if they are asked to only touch a part of the elephant, they are likely to misdiagnose what this animal is. One who may be touching the rope would say this is a rope. The other may say this is a wall. Another would say this is a fan, and the like. So this misdiagnosis is a result of not having a synoptic view of the matter. And I think this problem can also manifest itself the way we articulate and understand political problems, economic problems, and the like. Synchronization is the second pillar of MEDEMER, or we call it synergy. This seeks to strive for a common goal, act in unison, synchronize, conquer, coordinate. These are the defining elements of synchronization. If you look at, for instance, the musical instruments, if some artists were to play certain musical instruments, unless they synchronize those musical instruments, the voice, the sound that's going to come out of these musical instruments will be completely unpleasant to the ear. So synchronization is key, as we also apply it to the political process, as we also apply it to the economic process. Synthesis, again, is an aspect of MEDEMER. This is, the conception that the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. I think this best explains Ethiopian and Ethiopians. We are greater than, the sum of each individuals that live in Ethiopia, and that's what synthesis is about. The other is symbiosis. In the case of symbiosis, it seeks to create a system that benefits everyone without harm. So there is a mutually beneficial engagement, a shared arrangement where those actors will become eventual winners. That's what symbiosis is, and MEDEMER's conception wants to come up with a win-win solution for everyone that's involved in this process. And the last one is, I think, symmetry. Symmetry, it's about that balancing act that I earlier mentioned, situation that enables a healthy existence for all actors in a system. We need to do a balancing act to maintain equilibrium in whatever business that we may be engaging in. Eventually, we will come up with a system that's well-functioning, a system that will result and achieve prosperity for the country. So what are the fundamentals of MEDEMER, the necessary basic conditions? The necessary basic conditions for MEDEMER are 3. Number 1, it requires everyone to take initiative. Number 2, of course, there is a need to do some balancing, the need to create equilibrium. The third is we need to have a common goal as a nation. And I'm not going to discuss each one by one. I will just go into the goals of MEDEMER. Now we have seen the meaning of MEDEMER. We have seen the 6 pillars of MEDEMER. We have also looked at the fundamentals of MEDEMER. But eventually, what is it that it seeks to achieve by implementing MEDEMER in Ethiopia as a governing philosophy of the government? Number 1, it seeks to achieve national unity in diversity. That's one important aspect of MEDEMER. There has been so much work that has been done by rather emphasizing the differences among the different nations and nationalities in Ethiopia. I think so much work needs to be done now to bring together every nation and nationality in Ethiopia. So that work of building a national unity is, a challenging task that awaits us. So this is one goal of MEDEMER. The second is we have to respect citizens' dignity. Citizens should feel proud of their nation as a country, and that would require observing the fundamental freedoms and human rights of each and every one of the Ethiopian citizens. So that's again the second goal of MEDEMER. And the holy glare of MEDEMER would be prosperity. When we say prosperity, it looks at it from all different dimensions. We're not just talking about economic prosperity, we are also talking about political prosperity, we are talking about social prosperity. Every aspect of prosperity will be realized through MEDEMER. So to summarize, MEDEMER is, a homegrown notion offered for the common future of the nation. So this is a pragmatic solution born out of the recognition that for so long we have experimented and implemented policies that were not, in fact, well suited to the prevailing realities in Ethiopia. Let's now have a homegrown solution that takes into account the prevailing reality in the country. MEDEMER is a road to a victory. It's a win-win formula for the nation. It's also the way to fulfill the fundamental needs of human beings and both direct and indirect needs of human beings. It also relies on building upon positive political and economic gains. It seeks to rectify mistakes and also strives to achieve the interests and needs of future generations. So in sum, MEDEMER is the way to ensure prosperity and hence our survival. Thank you for listening.
Just to summarize why it's important for us to delve a little bit into the basics and why we took a little bit of time to understand the basics of MEDEMER, because it gives a rationale for explaining the political, how MEDEMER views the politics, how MEDEMER views the economy, and how MEDEMER also views foreign relations. So to just summarize it for you, balance is the ultimate goal. There is a place for everyone. Taking stock of prevailing reality, and I think over the past year and a half you have seen the manifestation within the administration as well being very forthcoming in terms of where are we, how did we get here, and what do we need to own up to. The second component, acknowledging human nature and human potential, but really as well being able to harness it and divert that aspect of human potential and human nature of competition and cooperation for building a shared future. And finally, the third aspect, outlining solutions and responding to the prevailing reality as well, are key components to it. I just want to highlight at this point as well, while the book in Amharic and Oromifa came out about 2 weeks ago for our international community, the book in English will come out sometime in December as well, so we will inform you when it's available. I would like to introduce right now Dr. Gideon Timotheos, who's going to be taking us into MEDEMER and politics.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in my presentation today, I will provide a very brief overview of the political aspects and manifestation of MEDEMER. So the outline of my presentation would be as displayed on the screen. First, I'll discuss MEDEMER as a political orientation and try to outline its general features as a political direction. Then I'll discuss the ultimate objective of MEDEMER. Then I'll proceed to discussing MEDEMER and democracy, the commitment of MEDEMER for building a democratic Ethiopia, and also the challenge that are identified in the book in relation to building a democratic Ethiopia, and finally the solutions and way forward that is presented in the book. So in the interest of time, I'll directly go to the first part of my presentation. So MEDEMER is not, as presented in the book, it's not an all-encompassing dogmatic ideology. Rather, we could describe it as a political orientation. The approach to politics that the author argues for in the book is a centrist politics, a politics that transcends ideological camps, ideological labels, and that is rather intended to be pragmatic and reflective. So the author discusses at length the importance of trying to address our problems in a pragmatic manner, trying to analyze and understand our problems not through ideological lenses, but as they are on the ground, as they are in the reality, facing them and trying to understand them, and then trying to provide workable solutions, solutions that will really overcome our challenge and problems. So there is a lot of emphasis on the need to be pragmatic instead of being dogmatic and fixated on ideological labels and ideological guides. So the author argues that whatever problems we are facing, instead of trying to provide a solution that is prescribed by this or that ideological camp, it's better to ask what will work, what will really enable us to overcome this challenge and provide solutions. So it's a very hard-nosed, pragmatic approach, but it's a pragmatism that is that operates within a certain normative principle. So it's a principled pragmatism, and it is argued in the book that this kind of centrist politics, this kind of pragmatism, could provide a basis for an inclusive big tent politics. So it's meant to provide a departure from a political history, a political trajectory in which there has been a lot of division, a lot of labeling and confrontation, animosity, and so on. So instead of that, the kind of approach that MEDEMER would like to bring towards our politics is a more inclusive, accommodative politics that will accommodate people from different ideological background, people from different ethnic communities, cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So this is the kind of approach towards politics. So as has been pointed out by my colleague, Commissioner Abbebe earlier, there is a lot of emphasis on celebrating, recognizing and building upon our past successes. So the author wants us to depart from this practice of denouncing or delegitimizing everything that has happened in the past, and he argues for the importance of building upon previous successes, the success of previous administrations, previous generations, and also recognizing and rectifying mistakes committed in the past with an overall perspective of safeguarding and advancing the interest of future generations. Now, the ultimate objective of MEDEMER as a political or economic orientation is bringing about multidimensional prosperity. Prosperity not only in the material sense, but in a much wider sense. So the kind of prosperous society that the author argues we need to build in Ethiopia is a society that is capable of ensuring the material well-being of all members of the society, ensuring the equal dignity of all members of society, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, or what have you, and also a society that is capable of ensuring the equal liberty or freedom of all citizens. So an approach to politics that takes into account the multifaceted needs of human beings and trying to build a society and a state that will be able to address these various needs. So having this as a background, when we come to the diagnosis of Ethiopia's political problem and the prevailing situation in Ethiopia, what the author argues is, the author argues that for most of our modern history, Ethiopian governments have been faced with existential threats to the independence and territorial integrity of the Ethiopian state, and also threats to the various administrations. And the fact that these kind of threats were imminent has meant that the governments were preoccupied with tackling these threats, be it to the state or to the regime. And this has meant that the governments really didn't have that much time, resource, or attention that they could devote to addressing other needs of the society, political, economic, and social needs. And the author argues that this has led to discontent and grievances among the public at large, which has led to protests and oppression, and our governments have very often resorted to violent oppression as a response to the protests and demands from the public. So the author argues that our history is marked by or characterized by a vicious cycle of oppression and violent protest. And he argues that unless we break this vicious cycle of oppression and protest, things will keep getting worse and worse, and ultimately it will lead to a catastrophic result. So the ultimate political objective of the MEDEMER project, according to the author, in the political realm is breaking this cycle by building a democratic society. So the antidote to this problem, to the problem that has been diagnosed, the prescription is building a robust democracy in Ethiopia. And as you'll see in the book later on, the author discusses various approaches towards building a democracy and argues that within our current context, the kind of democracy we should build in Ethiopia is an inclusive consociational democracy. So what he means by an inclusive consociational democracy is a democracy that strikes the right balance between competition and collaboration, a democracy that makes room for contestation for power, for competition, but at the same time provides a platform for collaboration. And if you ask, how is this supposed to be accomplished? This is supposed to be accomplished through the usual mechanisms of a consociational democracy, including grand coalition between various political groups, proportional representation of various political groups and identities at all levels of the government, ensuring the autonomy of various communities as envisaged in the existing federal constitutional dispensation, and also providing for minority groups a voice in the decision-making process, a voice in the governance process that might not necessarily be warranted by their numbers. So in the short and medium term, the author argues that building a consociational democracy that is compatible with the existing constitutional framework is the way to go. But the author indicates that consociational democracy could perhaps be a bridge to building a democracy that is more comfortable with fierce contestation for power, with fierce competition among different political groups. So after outlining this argument, the author identifies several challenges that we might face in the effort to consolidate democracy in Ethiopia. The first challenge that the author identifies is the weak legitimacy that the Ethiopian state enjoys as a result of bitter divisions and conflicts that are very much associated with the historical process through which the Ethiopian state is formed. So this is one of the most important challenges that the author discusses at length. The author also argues that in addition to the weakness of the state legitimacy, the weakness of institutions we have, this could be administrative, bureaucratic institutions, this could be democratic institutions or institutions in the security apparatus. The fact that these institutions are not do not have the level of strength and capability that we'd like to have is also another challenge we'll face in the process of consolidating democracy in Ethiopia. He also argues that the quality of leadership at various levels or at all levels is another challenge. And finally, he also acknowledged the fact that we have a deeply ingrained autocratic and violent political culture is an additional challenge that we need to overcome if we are to consolidate democracy in Ethiopia. After identifying and discussing this challenge, the author tries to provide solutions and the way forward in overcoming this challenge. As far as divisions, conflict, and the state legitimacy is concerned, the author argues that we need to overcome this challenge through a process of national reconciliation and consensus building. So the author emphasizes the importance of national reconciliation, be it through institutions like the National Reconciliation Commission, and also using traditional reconciliation processes and institutions so that various political groups, various communities, ethno-linguistic groups will come together and will be able to overcome enmity and acrimony that often characterizes our politics. The author also argues that in addition to national reconciliation, it is important to build a robust consensus regarding various fundamental issues on which we are deeply divided. As you know, there is a great deal of polarization about critical, important issues on which there should have been some sort of national agreement or consensus. And to bring about this consensus, the author argues that it is important that we have informed, sincere deliberation and dialogue before jumping into negotiations. So before any form of political bargaining or negotiation, what precedes that or what comes before that, according to the author, is very important. The quality of the deliberation, the nature of the dialogue we have before negotiations for the author makes all the difference. So he emphasizes the importance of having deliberations, having dialogues that are informed by objective studies on critical national questions. And then those should be followed by negotiations and bargainings leading to settlement and national consensus. The author also argues that if we are to consolidate democracy in Ethiopia, we need to focus on building strong institutions capable of discharging their constitutional and legal mandate within a democratic normative framework. So building the capacity of our institutions, reforming our bureaucratic, democratic, and security institutions is quite important. The author argues that we should depart from the previous approach of institutional reform that was very centralized and that was very politicized, and we should rather follow a process of institution building, institutional reform that takes into account the context and needs of various institutions. The author also argues that in the process of democratization, in the process of consolidating democracy in Ethiopia, particularly in the absence of strong institutions, in the short and medium term, the quality of leadership and the role of leaders at all sectors, at all levels is very important. So he also pays a lot of attention to the need to expand the pool of leaders and build the capacity of those that assume leadership roles in various sectors of government. Finally, the author argues that the sustainability and quality of the democracy that will build cannot be predicated only on legal or institutional reforms that are spearheaded by the government. He argues that in the long run, the quality of the civic and democratic culture we build is quite important. And in order to build a very strong civic and democratic culture, he emphasizes the role of non-state actors, the role of civil society, the role of education, and other sectors of building a democratic and civic culture that will, in the long run, sustain a robust and meaningful democracy. Thank you for your attention.
Now I'll call upon Dr. Namerra Mamo to present on the economics and MEDEMER.
እንደምን ዋላችሁ, meaning good afternoon. So in the next few minutes, what I will try to do is to give you a bit of context what this idea of MEDEMER is when it comes to the economy and the things that have been done using this political economy idea. What I wanted to do first is that I want to give you an idea, especially, I mean, this is an idea, so an idea should always have a contribution in the political economy framework. And I wanted to give in the next 5 minutes what challenges have we had in the past when it comes to analyzing a particular economy, whether it is the economic growth or economic development. How does the idea of MEDEMER sees that challenges? So for most of development practitioners, whether they are in the policy arena or in the research, they have always asked this question: why are some countries so rich and others are so poor? And they wanted to understand the fundamental and the proximate causes of these differences between, you know, different nations in the world when it comes to their growth and development outcomes. Of course, these practitioners usually comes up with the stylized factors, and they take African economies, or most African economies, where it has become literally impossible to achieve sustainable and inclusive developmental outcomes. And you have other cases in Southeast Asian countries where this the objective of creating sustainable and inclusive economic development has been pretty much, you know, accomplished. So many factors have been identified and proposed in the past, but I wanted to bring in some context in here to fit with the idea of MEDEMER. So most of the political economists who've pursued, you know, understanding the fundamental causes of these challenges, they come up with this false dichotomy type of analyzing the fundamental causes. So on one side you have practitioners proposing that the reason behind why some countries fail to achieve sustainable growth and sustainable development outcomes is because of market failures, and I'm sure most of you guys know what this concept mean in that regard. And others propose no, the reason why most African countries, or for that matter any other countries in the developing world, the reason why they fail to achieve a sustainable growth is because of the institutions they have. Usually they frame it in a sense of government failure. And this is the false dichotomies that we have in the past. So for several decades, practitioners, researchers, and people in the policy arena always argued in that perspective, or using these lenses that they've tried to analyze why certain countries are so successful in achieving sustainable growth, and while others fail to do so. So this is the idea of MEDEMER. MEDEMER has an hypothesis or a proposition for this fundamental question. So it started with the idea that a success or a failure of any development policies, whether it is in the developing economy context or developed economies context, for that matter, an emerging economies context, can be explained by the dynamics, by the dynamic interactions, and by the nature of all agents in the economic system. So what we had in the past is people who are on the market failure type of, analytics. They always come up with the idea of characterizing the market. Within that market system, they come up as if the agent is only the private sector, and the analysis, the analysis they provide and the solutions and the conclusions they come up with always surround us with that, private sector related or getting the prices right type of analysis. But on the other side, what you have is they framed government as the sole creator of a wealth in the economy, and they come up with that kind of, analysis saying that government is the fundamental, causes to wealth creations or the failure of wealth creations. But what we have in this MEDEMER is, in the MEDEMER proposition is, there are several players or agents in the economy. So any policy success or failure should have to be explained by the dynamic interactions between the different agents or actors in the economy. We cannot solely look at a single player type of analysis by just creating a false dichotomy that puts us always in the dilemma. So what the MEDEMER says is that, as my colleague Ababa and Gideon have alluded to it, is that so in order to achieve an optimal developmental outcomes or a political settlement or a social development outcomes, what we should be having is a proper effective coordination or synergization of actions taken by all agents in the economy. We cannot afford to only look through the lens of a single player type of analysis. When we have such a kind of an equilibrium, coordination and synergization of actions taken by all agents and players in the economy, it's guaranteed that we could achieve an optimal equilibrium. In this context, a sustainable growth and economic development, which is and optimal to all concerned stakeholders in a particular economy by making them better off. Otherwise, if this coordination and synergizing actions is not achieved, what will happen is that the system could not induce or incentivize the different energies to come up together in order to coordinate or create that synergetic force to achieve a sustainable growth and economic development, in which context the stakeholders within that particular system becomes worse off. So this is the fundamental proposition that the idea of MEDEMER brings into discussions when it comes to analyzing a particular development. There should be positive synergy in a particular economic system. If you don't attain that equilibrium of the positive synergy or coordination between the different players and actors in the economic system, we will not be able to achieve that optimal economic outcomes. The reason why it believes so or it proposes so is that if you see the nature of these players and actors in the economic system, they are constructed or created in such a sense that there is a strong complementarities and also interdependencies between the different agents in the economic system. So attaining that equilibrium coordination or a synergetic force between the different agents could guarantee us a better outcome. So this is the idea. If you see it in a more political economy perspective, one of the biggest positive contributions I personally think MEDEMER brings in is that this idea of seeing the agency within a particular economic system. In other words, we had a huge, for several decades, there is this debate between different practitioners saying that who is really the wealth creator in a particular economic system? Is it a government, a private sector, the education sector, or other NGOs who are really involved in the social, developmental objectives? So what we have in the MEDEMER is that, all plays a particular, roles in their own distinctive way in the economy. So the best way is to create that positive synergy in that economic system so that we could achieve a sustainable growth and developmental outcomes. So moving on, as my colleagues have already alluded to this in explaining the fundamental objectives of MEDEMER, I try to quickly touch on when it comes to the economy. There are three fundamental objectives of MEDEMER. MEDEMER is not revolutionary by its nature, so it builds on an existing positive achievements. So the first bold objective of the MEDEMER idea is to incrementally expand our past economic major achievements. These economies have achieved a lot in the economic sphere. So identifying the positive or major economic achievements and trying to expand or maximize in order to create a better, economic system or prosperity. The other major objective of MEDEMER is there are also mistakes when it comes to identifying policies, identifying incentive structures, following a particular strategies in order to, fulfill certain development objectives. So through that processes, it is natural or inherently a system or a policymaker could tend to make mistakes. So what MEDEMER says is that while we are acknowledging positive economic achievements, we need to also pay attention to the economic failures and the mistake that we have been done yesterday, so that we can boldly rectify on them in order to restore or restructure our economic system. And the fundamental is about tomorrow. So the question is now, if we properly identify the positives that have been done yesterday, and at the same time rectify on the mistakes, so the major thing is now about how could we manage our emerging economic future. What type of policies should we follow as a state and for that matter as a country in order to fulfill our developmental aspirations. These countries has got a lot to do when it comes to fulfilling the economic demands of its own citizens. So the bigger question is now, how are we going to promote or create that shared prosperity so that we create a better economic system for our citizens? So speaking of past economic achievements, MEDEMER acknowledges a lot of major, positive achievements that EPRDF has achieved over the past 28 years. Ethiopia has experienced two types of economic takeoffs over the past 3 decades. The first one is at the early 1990s, when we transited from war economy to relatively an open economy. And the other one is early 2000, especially 2004. These are the major turning point when it comes to economic achievements of Ethiopia. So when we speak of past achievements, we are really looking into this time period, the past 28 years, more specifically the past 1.5 decades. So the acknowledgement that should be in order is Ethiopia has really experienced a significant economic growth over the past 1.5 decades, and the real GDP has literally tripled when compared to peer African countries. But that also comes with a challenge in terms of promoting shared prosperity, which I will come back to it later. And the other arena in which we should be acknowledging past achievements in Ethiopia is the efforts that have been done in expanding our social sectors, more specifically investment in the health sector and the education sector. So Ethiopia has expanded the provision of primary health care at the very local levels in a very significant margins. Similarly, the same efforts have been done to expand our primary and secondary education. Because of all these investments, relatively speaking, an average household in Ethiopia has a better health, education, and living standards today when compared to 15 or 20 years ago. And the other aspect is the predominant factor that have explained our economic growth over the past 2 decades is the public investment in the infrastructure. Ethiopia has done an incredible public-led or state-led investment in energy sector, in water provision, expansion of transportation, roads and rail networks. We've also done an incredible job in creating commendable investment in the telecommunication infrastructure. So these are the positives that we should be rectifying. We should be acknowledging as a positive major achievement and build up on that, as opposed to following a revolutionary, approach by discrediting all these positives. So what are the major challenges? Major challenges, all these positives also comes with, issues of quality of growth, and also some major economic problems. The first one is the micro perspective. In micro perspectives, I would like to highlight here quickly 4 major, challenges that Ethiopia faces today. One, low productivity growth. Our economy at the local level, if you take all sectors in the economy, are characterized by this low productivity growth. On average, over the past 2 decades, Ethiopia's productivity growth is no more than 4%. Compared to peer countries in Africa or any other, low-income countries in the world, this is one of the lowest. And there needs to be some work that should be done in order to rectify the mistakes. It could be policy choices or an incentive structure that have hindered our productivity trap. The other one is job creating challenges. Over the past 15 days, we created close to 2 million working age population, but our economy has no capacity to absorb all this, working force. Our economy actually has the capacity of generating less than 1 million. So we have all these accumulated, unemployment or underemployment challenges over the past decades. The other one is high cost of living due to largely the public-led investments in the infrastructure, which have expanded the aggregate demand of the economy. It created this inflationary pressure, and the burden is on the poor societies or the segments of the society who lives on a fixed income. Over the past 2 decades, on average, Ethiopian inflation rate has grown by 15%, almost 5 to 6% more than the income grows on average. And the other thing is food security challenges. Of course, we've achieved an incredible job in reducing poverty reductions over the past years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the society are freely, out of poverty. The vulnerability of poverty problem is still very high in Ethiopia. Close to 25% of our total population still waits upon the state and other NGOs to provide them a daily food. So these are, the best examples I could take to explain the major challenges that our economy faces. The other one is the macroeconomy perspective at the national level. Our external balance is growing, imbalance is growing. We import more, but our export is very narrow. The base is very narrow, even over the years on average. Our export earning is contracting while the import is expanding. That's one major challenge that we face at the macro level. The other one is growing fiscal deficit because our growth approach is state-led, and the state has huge expenditure, but the capacity of the state to collect or raise revenues or mobilize resources is very limited. So the balance between the state income and the government income and government expenditure is widening at that level. The other perspective is also high debt distress. High debt distress in this context is, if you see the debt to GDP ratio of Ethiopia, it's fine. It's about less than 60%. What the economists say that is, a fine ratio. But the problem is this: we are not servicing our debt as much as we are, contractually obliged, because most of these loans come on the short-term commercial loans. They have high interest rate, but our export market is not performing that well. So our foreign exchange revenues or earnings is very limited. So we are constrained in that sense to service our debt. And the other major problem is also problems with our financial system, which doesn't induce or incentivizes the citizens, whether it's a private sector or individual citizens or the government, to save. So our domestic saving mobilization is very low, so that the investment, expenditures at the home. So how are we going to address all these challenges? I'm sure you guys have come across the homegrown economic reforms that have been, promoted in different platforms over the past couple of weeks. There are three major areas of priorities of economic reform. The first one is, how are we going to manage our macroeconomy when it comes to our fiscal discipline and also tight monetary policies? All those challenges that I've mentioned earlier, the micro and the macro perspective, in one way or another, relates to how we manage our macroeconomy. The type of monetary policy instruments that we use at our central bank, our interest rate policies, pricing policies, and the money printing, and also the direct advances that we give it to the state. And the other is also, I've already mentioned earlier, about our budgetary system. The state capacity to collect or mobilize revenues is very limited. That could be about our taxation policies and the institutional arrangements that we have in place. And all these things have been prioritized, and the reform is being done in that order. And the other is the enabling sectors. When you speak about export performance, we talk about businesses and investments, and there are major bottlenecks that constrain our business and investment climate. The first one is the ease of doing business, which Ethiopia is boldly going after it and trying to rectify major challenges in the business and investment climate and trying to address challenges. In that, we have a financial sector challenges, the availability of credit and the disbursement of credits that we have in place doesn't promote the private sector initiatives or private initiative, whether it is small and medium scale investment or large scale investment. So in that regard, there is an ongoing financial sector reform. The other major issue is bottlenecks in our external trade, which is our logistics sector. The logistics sector is also in that regard being reformed, and also there is an idea in place to privatize it and open it up for a global competition as well. The same thing with the energy sector. The energy sector is one of the fundamental challenges constraining our value-creating industries or manufacturing sector. And there are an ongoing, policies and dialogues in the policy arena in order to devise a better policy. The other one is diversifying our sources of economic growth. In the past, our policy solely depended on the agriculture, and somehow with the value-adding manufacturing sector. But MEDEMER proposes we should be diversifying in a sense of multi-sectoral ways, so that we can tap into our natural resources, whether it is mineral sector or the agriculture or the industry sector, including the manufacturing, and also the services sector. The services sector, mainly the tourism sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Namerra. So we'll just beg for your attention a little bit more for the final presentation, which gives an explanation of how MEDEMER views foreign relations, and this is obviously of particular interest to you as well. I would like to introduce again my colleague Lenjo Bati, who's expert advisor at the Prime Minister's office.
Thank you, Buleni. I will try to make it very brief. It's a difficult job since most of you are diplomats or work in international organizations. So I'm not here to lecture or repeat on what you know, but I'm here to connect how or relate how MEDEMER views the foreign relations or the foreign engagement. How is it related? As you saw from previous presentation, MEDEMER is about independence and interdependence. How to create a connection, how to create a relation, how to create a synergy, and putting this in place in order to get better results. So the objective of my presentation is to explain to the concept of MEDEMER and how it relates to the work of the diplomatic field. As you know, every country's diplomatic work or foreign relation work is meant to strengthen the given nation's national interest. So within this view, how are you going to organize, how are you going to carry, how are you going to engage our neighbors as well as the larger global community? MEDEMER, this principle, as has been explained by my colleagues, it doesn't start from zero. It is a reformist. It is past dependence. It tries to build on some of the success that has been achieved in the past. So therefore, it doesn't start from a particular things. It starts by looking into some of the positive assets on which we build. As you know, Ethiopia has a long history. It's one of the oldest nation in the world. At the same time, it has been known for its freedom, defeated the Italian colonial aspiration twice, and also Ethiopia is known for its anti-colonialism stand globally. Ethiopia was also a member of League of Nations when many African countries were a colony of Europe. Ethiopia was also a member of UN founding member, a founder of African Organization of African Union, and at the same time, Ethiopia is also well known in its engagement in peacekeeping efforts globally. The Korean War and the Congo, and also the current wider role that this nation is playing is some of the positive assets that makes Ethiopia easily relate to the international community. As you can see the pictures, Emperor Haile Selassie and President Kennedy of United States discussing on bilateral issues. You can see the previous communist leader Mengistu also, who was also a global leader, a friend to Moscow, Cuba, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, all this leftist socialist camp. The late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was also a very prominent leader worldwide, Hailemariam Desalegn, and also the current Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, added on this and also added the positive endowment that Ethiopia enjoys in the past, even now reached to the level of winning the Nobel Peace Prize. So therefore, in general, our leaders enjoyed enormous legitimacy outside, although their administration has been contested globally. How can you correct that? Instead of trying to achieve legitimacy from outside and trying to convince our population here, how can we earn legitimacy first domestically and project that legitimacy globally is what MEDEMER is. This is how to correct some of the past mistakes. So in general, the MEDEMER, its objective is to maintain Ethiopian national interest. In order to put our foreign policy in place, it is very important to assess the global trends as well as some regional trends. As you know, there are new developments every time. World is not static. World is a dynamic phenomenon. Globalization after the Cold War was a new phenomena. It has winners and losers. And Southern Sudan also came into existence. And the regional geopolitics is also dynamics. One state born, Eritrea, another state disintegrated, Somalia. So the regional dynamics is still in the making. The global trend is also changing from time to time. So therefore, we need, by understanding this, we need to have new approaches. How we are going to frame our foreign policy. Primarily, as you have seen many times, the key components of this MEDEMER is to safeguard, at the same time bring citizens' dignity. The underlying factor is how to create a situation where our citizens move around, work around, or do their daily life with dignity. That's very important, both domestically, also globally. We always give attention to citizens' dignity, not like pursuing them as an opposition or as a terrorist or an outlaw that has been pursued in the past. The other is the issue of cyber safety is very important. This is a new development globally. Ethiopia is also interested in pursuing regional integration. We do this in order to make more cooperation between our neighbors. At the same time, Ethiopia, as my previous colleague, Dr. Namara said, wants to pursue diverse economic alternatives. So our foreign policy objectives as meant to secure our national interest, these are some of the things that have changed in the past. Globally, you can see alliances and cooperations being formed. This is a trend in many places. This is a result of globalization. Globalization was a process where the world have seen time and space compression. Goods move very fast. Human beings move very fast. It was also an age of migration. So within this, you can see alliances and cooperation also happening. We are also seeing regional integration. Many regions from North America to Latin America to Europe and also Asia, and also Africa, we have seen many efforts aimed at achieving regional integration. This is also an age of technology. Technology is also another factor. It brings its own positive as well as some other challenge. The other developments globally is also there are multiple actors. States are not the only actors as we used to know in geopolitics or foreign policy. There are multiple actors. At the same time, we also see a trend that many countries or governments were upholding agreements or treaties. However, there are also some worrisome global trends. States are being undermined. States are being weakened. Terrorism is also another manifestation. The geopolitics is also very dynamic. There are conflicts and cooperation in different places. We also witness the rise of populism and nationalism in different places to the level that one single individuals can make many mobilization, whether for good or for bad. At the same time, nationalism as a reaction to globalization has been also witnessed in many places in the world. Another worrisome trend is environmental concern. There is a concern about climatic change, water pollution, soil pollution, as well as air pollution. These are major trends that are worrying the world. Another area is that the book assess before it builds on how Ethiopian foreign relation is framed. The world still have a multipolar competition. This is different from what we know during the Cold War, which the world was divided into two camps. Now, the center of competition is not only between one or two ideologies or countries. The actors, the players, are many and multiple now, from Asia to Latin America to Europe and East Asia also. The areas of competition in the past, it was about ideological competition, it was on military competition. Now the major competition shift towards economic competition. The book takes stock of this also. As I said, there are also non-governmental organizations, as you can see, especially in terms of technology, the Facebook, Twitter, and all having enormous impact. If you remember, the US Congress called Twitter and Facebook and others holding a hearing how these non-governmental actors impacted elections in the United States. So they are a new tool. They are a new tool in our country also. As you probably know, the Facebook also projects a different image of Ethiopia. In actuality, on the ground, the image of Ethiopia is also different. So people get confused what they see from Facebook and what's in actuality doesn't really match. So new technology is supposed to advance human interest, but in some places the use is also affecting the well-being, the peace of society. Trends in Africa, there is relative stability in Africa, there is economic progress in Africa. At the same time, there is also an aspiration for regional integration. On the downside, poverty is also one of the challenges facing our continent. Displacement is massive. At the same time, post-election violence, pre-election violence are also part of facts in Africa. And the issue of resource competition is also, as it has been an old problem, still affecting the African continent. When it comes to the Horn of Africa, we see increased military base in this region. United States, France, China, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey and others are also setting up a base in this region. That means this region is attracting a lot of superpowers and a lot of players. There are also internal strife. Many nations in this region are fragile, so therefore you see some internal strife and displacement. Terrorism is also part of some of the challenges in West Africa and partly in the Horn of Africa also. The competition for national resources is also a major problem. So I just trying to give you a background how the books review how the globe and how our region, how the African continents, the dynamics is taking place. So after reviewing, so the book frames the Ethiopian foreign policy based on 5 pillars. Number 1, the Ethiopian foreign policy pursue a balanced view, a pragmatic view, a balanced view. It balances between competition and cooperation. At the same time, the Ethiopian foreign policy pursue a policy of national pride. We need to register, we need to work towards achieving a national pride. Doing that also, we need to also pursue our national interest in order to develop and expand our faith in the global economy. It also gives priority for engagement. So engaging neighbors, engaging other stakeholders, engaging the international community, engaging a global as well as regional organization is also a priority. The other pillar in which the foreign policy is aimed to anchor itself is on neighborliness. We give priority to our neighbors. Neighbors are very important. Ethiopia being a landlocked country, there is no way Ethiopia can develop or prosper without having a very peaceful, cordial relations with its neighbors. And also, as I said before, competition is very important. We have to compete in order to develop. At the same time, you need to also cooperate with your neighbors. So we are not pursuing a shortcut competition. We try to balance that with an interest of mutual development, mutual interest, that really advance the interest of both countries. That is what the foreign policy is placed on. In the past, as you know, states compete among themselves. You have to compete, but at the same time, cooperation is also very important. So how can we achieve national dignity? We achieve 5 minutes, I will be done soon. We achieve national dignity by safeguarding our national interest. When you safeguard your national interest, it is aimed at achieving your national dignity. We also pursue a policy of internationalism that also makes us to play our role in international arena. We also very jealously safeguard our sovereignty. At the same time, we also work in safeguarding the safety and dignity of our citizens, both here and also globally, as we have so many Ethiopian citizens scattered all over the world, close to 3 million. So our policy put this into consideration. So how do we, what are the manifestations of national pride? How do you gauge them? How do you measure them? First of all, if you achieve societal dignity, you can achieve citizens' right. If you achieve citizens' right, you can also achieve societal dignity. If you achieve citizens' right, societal dignity, then you can have national respect. So they are mutually enforcing one another. So therefore, when we when we aim at achieving national pride, we are trying to get things done in these three areas. Also, when we pursue our national interest with our neighbors or with other engaged partners, there's two schools of thought. There are two ways of doing, looking into things. What we call relative interest and also objective interest. Relative interest is always calculated at trying to get what you want to get compared to what others get. Objective interest is an opposite of that. It is aimed at getting what you really need. For example, the Nile River. It's originated here. Most of the tributaries are here. We are not making right arguments. We are not making this belongs to us. We are just making an argument. We need this amount of water, this amount of technology to develop our country. So it's objective. We have to make sure it benefits both countries. So therefore, this is how we are going to pursue our foreign policy, and also we are trying to get out of the Hobbesian trap with our neighbors. Historically, Ethiopia always think Somalia is before its collapse to attack Ethiopia. Ethiopia militarized, Somalia also militarized. The conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea was also framed on what the other side was thinking. This side is ready to attack. This side is also thinking the other side is ready to attack. Within that mentality, the war broke, and the consequence for both of us was very disastrous. With regard to regional integration, the book and also the Prime Minister publicly declared that Ethiopia is pursuing regional integrations. It's a gradual process. When we do that, we are planning aimed at achieving common interest that's beneficial to all of us. Also, we are working on strengthening global as well as regional cooperation. Doing that, we also work on enhancing our diplomatic engagement globally. How are we going to implement this? What are the tools? What are the vehicles to implement this foreign policy? First of all, it's very important to produce very strong leadership, strategic, with a strategic view. Also, public work, public offices must be run in a professional way with competence. At the same time, we have to also build strong organization, the institutions that are sustainable, that can last long. So the issue of leadership is very important. The issue of competence and doing things very professionally is very important. At the same time, creating a system, creating an organization that is sustainable is also one of the strategy that our foreign policy try to achieve. There are two areas of power, soft power and hard power. And because the philosophy of MEDEMER is about keeping synergy, about keeping balance, so we pursue or we implement, we want to execute both of them. The soft power is less costly, it's also normative, it is positive, it doesn't require so many resources like military, so we pursue both of them in order to fulfill our foreign policy objectives. For example, some of the soft tools that we think we have a comparative advantage are like sports. Ethiopians are well known with marathon race, so this will enhance Ethiopian image globally. So it is a tool, it's a soft tool. Education and research is also another one. We need to produce a lot of good scholars, good scientists, who will be doing an excellent research and known worldwide. Media is also another area when you can get soft power and enhance your foreign image. Culture, literature, and music is also another one. As you know, Ethiopians, as I said before, Ethiopian diaspora are all over the world. Ethiopian cuisine, Ethiopian culture, Ethiopian literature have a good base, so we need to build on that, expand that, and increase our national image. At the same time, domestically, we need to produce a society that is orderly, a society that behaves in an ordered way, the society that is ethical, society that follow rule of law. This also enhance our image. In terms of the economy, of course, one major area in which the foreign policy helps is attracting investors and finding market globally. So the policy now is to create strong market mechanism. In this area, my colleague, Dr. Namara, explained in detail, so I don't want to go into that. Then the issue of institutions are a must. Without strong institutions, you cannot do much. These are the deficits in many African countries. At the same time, we have to also diversify our economic sectors. So from agriculture to manufacturing to tourism, in so many areas, this also needs some work. Another area of hard power is also build your military. This is not a warmongering policy. It is aimed at deterring wars. It is very important. This military needs to be very efficient. It has to be modern. It has to be multitasked because this region suffers from terrorist threats. So the ground force, the air force, the cyber technology, as well as Navy. Some of you might wonder, Ethiopia doesn't even have access to the sea. How are you really talking about forming a Navy? There are many instances where landlocked countries have a Navy. The international water is only about 60 miles away from Ethiopia. We can use that, we can utilize that. We can also negotiate with our neighboring countries to find a base, because as you see, this Red Sea corridor is a pathway for many international trade, so we have an interest there. So therefore, just a year ago, a policy decision has been made for Ethiopia to start once a famous navy that we lost in 1991 when Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia. In terms of diplomacy, Ethiopia pursues bilateral as well as multilateral relations. When it comes to Africa, we continue to build in our past efforts. Pan-Africanism is also another pillar which guides our foreign policy when it comes to Africa. Public diplomacy is also another area that we are putting a lot of emphasis and focus. Another area that also enhances our diplomacy is civic institutions, building civic institutions. Last is also engaging the diaspora. This is the stadium, the Target Center in Minneapolis. This picture was taken when the Prime Minister visited Ethiopia. As you can see, this is a very diverse population with diverse flag, with diverse cultural clauses. This is huge and massive. Previously, most Ethiopian diaspora always demonstrate against leaders, and this time that trend is changing. The government is putting a lot of good programs to attract these diasporas. The diasporas are also willing to help the country whether it's in terms of remittance, technology transfer, knowledge transfer. They are willing to help. So we are going to tap into this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to Lenjo Bati. In a nutshell, so MEDEMER views foreign relations as a balancing act between pursuing national interests and regional integration. At the beginning when we're discussing the basics of MEDEMER, Ababa had talked about our fates are intertwined. So in a nutshell, MEDEMER recognizes that peace, stability, and prosperity of its neighbors is is also something that would really impact the prosperity of Ethiopia as well. We thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us, and if there's any further questions as well, feel free to contact us via the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. We thank Ambassador Marcos Rique and our colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for facilitating this session with you. Thank you very much.